What if you could step into a time machine and witness the daily lives, myths, and celebrations of ancient Greece, not through words in a history book, but through the vivid, swirling brushstrokes of artists who lived over 2,500 years ago? Picture this: a humble clay vase, once used to hold wine or oil, now surviving centuries to whisper stories of gods battling titans, heroes embarking on perilous quests, and ordinary people laughing, feasting, and dancing under the Mediterranean sun. These aren't just fragments of pottery, they're masterpieces, each one a frozen moment in time, painted with such skill and emotion that they feel alive even today. The ancient Greeks didn't just create pottery, they transformed it into a canvas for storytelling, a medium so powerful that it outlasted empires. Think about that for a second. These vases were made without modern tools, without synthetic paints, yet their colors still blaze with reds and blacks. Their figures leap with energy, and their compositions balance harmony and drama like a perfectly staged play. Every curve of a warrior's body, every fold of a goddess's robe was painted with intention, capturing not just beauty but meaning. These artists weren't decorating dishes, they were preserving their culture's soul, one brushstroke at a time. And now we're about to embark on a journey through 42 of these extraordinary works, each one a masterpiece that reveals a different facet of ancient Greek life. Some will show us the grandeur of mythology, where Zeus hurls lightning and Athena springs fully armed from her father's head. Others will pull back the curtain on intimate, human moments, a mother cradling her child, athletes straining for victory, or lovers exchanging secret glances. Together, we'll decode the symbols, unravel the techniques, and even uncover the hidden messages these painters left behind. So settle in, because by the end of this exploration, you'll never look at a piece of pottery the same way again. These vases aren't just relics, they're invitations to step into a world of artistry, imagination, and timeless stories waiting to be rediscovered. Long before the breathtaking mythological scenes and lifelike figures adorned Greek vases, the story began with something far simpler: bold lines, zigzags, and concentric circles painted onto clay. This was the geometric period, stretching from around 900 to 700 BC, when artisans decorated their pottery with orderly, almost hypnotic patterns. At first glance, these designs might seem abstract, but look closer, they weren't just decoration. They were a visual language, a way to structure chaos into harmony, mirroring the Greeks' growing understanding of mathematics and the cosmos. Then something extraordinary happened. Around the 8th century BC, tiny human figures began to appear between those geometric bands, stylized, stick-like silhouettes mourning the dead or marching in processions. These were the first whispers of storytelling on pottery, a shift from pure pattern to narrative. Imagine the moment an artist first thought, what if this vase could show not just shapes but a scene from our lives? That spark would ignite a revolution in art. By the Archaic period, beginning around 600 BC, the transformation was undeniable. Artists traded rigid lines for flowing curves, filling vases with dynamic scenes of gods, heroes, and everyday life. The invention of the black figure technique, where silhouetted figures stood out in glossy black against the red clay, allowed for astonishing detail. Suddenly, vases showed Hercules wrestling the Nemean lion or Dionysus surrounded by revelers, each muscle and drapery fold painstakingly incised with a needle. This wasn't just craft, it was innovation, a leap toward realism that would define Western art for millennia. And let's not forget the potters themselves. These weren't anonymous laborers but celebrated masters, some even signing their work. Names like Exekias and Amphora survive today because their skill elevated pottery from utilitarian object to high art. They experimented with composition, perspective, and emotion, turning each vase into a window to another world. When you see a warrior's grieving face on a 2,500-year-old amphora, you're witnessing the birth of storytelling through visual art, a legacy that stretches from these clay surfaces to the canvases of Renaissance painters and beyond. So as we explore these 42 masterpieces, remember, every mythic battle, every quiet moment of daily life, every stroke of the brush owes its existence to those early artisans who dared to turn simple parts into something timeless. Their journey from geometric patterns to epic narratives isn't just the history of pottery. It's the history of how humans learned to tell stories without saying a word. To hold a Greek vase is to hold the pulse of an ancient civilization because these weren't mere objects of beauty, but the very heartbeat of daily existence. Picture a bustling Athenian marketplace, stacks of amphory brimming with olive oil from the countryside, slender lekythoi filled with perfumed oils for anointing the dead, and broad craters waiting to mix wine and water at a symposium. Every shape had a purpose, every design a story. The Greeks didn't separate art from utility. They wove them together, turning mundane tasks into moments of meaning. Take the humble hydria, its 3 handles designed for carrying water from the well. On its surface, you might find nymphs dancing by a spring, a poetic reminder that even this chore connected mortals to the divine. Or consider the kylix, a drinking cup whose tondo, the circular image at the bottom, often hid a playful surprise, a grinning satyr revealed only when the wine was drained. These weren't just decorations, they were conversations. A host serving wine in a cup painted with Hercules' labors wasn't just offering a drink. He was inviting guests to ponder virtue and endurance. Religion, too, lived in these vessels. Libations poured from ritual jugs like the ornicho honored the gods, while funerary vases carried scenes of mourning to guide the dead into the afterlife. The white ground lekythos, with its delicate paintings on a pale backdrop, was often left as a grave gift, its imagery a farewell embrace, a visit to the tomb, offering comfort to both the departed and the living. Even humor had its place. Some vases show comically exaggerated figures, like drunken revelers or mischievous gods, proving that the Greeks cherished laughter as much as heroism. What's astonishing is how these everyday objects became mirrors of an entire worldview. A storage jar might depict the judgment of Paris, subtly reinforcing ideals of beauty and consequence. A wine cup could celebrate athletic victories, tying personal achievement to civic pride. By studying them, we don't just see Greek art, we see Greek thought. The way they celebrated, grieved, worshipped, and even teased one another. So as we explore these 42 masterpieces, remember, you're not just looking at pottery. You're holding a lens to a society that saw no divide between the sacred and the ordinary, between storytelling and survival. These vases were their books, their billboards, their heirlooms, each one a testament to how art, when woven into the fabric of life, becomes immortal. The black figure technique wasn't just a style, it was a revolution in storytelling. Imagine an artist dipping their brush into a thick, glossy slip made of clay and water, painting bold silhouettes onto a vase's surface. As the kiln's heat worked its magic, those figures would turn deep black against the fiery red clay, creating a dramatic contrast that made every scene pop with energy. But here's what made it truly groundbreaking. Those black forms weren't flat or lifeless. Artists used sharp tools to etch fine lines into the glaze, revealing the red clay beneath to add muscle definition, flowing drapery, even the tiniest curls of hair. A warrior's determined gaze, the ripple of a lion's mane, the delicate folds of a goddess's robe, all came alive through these meticulous incisions. Corinth may have pioneered the technique around the 7th century B.C., but Athens elevated it to high art. Picture the workshop of a master like Exekias, where vases became stages for epic drama. His depiction of Achilles and Ajax playing a board game during the Trojan War isn't just decoration, it's a psychological study. The tension in their shoulders, the focus in their eyes, you can almost hear the dice roll. And then there's the Dionysus cup, where the god of wine lounges on a ship surrounded by playful dolphins, his curls and cloak rendered with such precision that the scene feels moments away from movement. These artists didn't just illustrate myths, they breathed humanity into them. What's often overlooked is the daring experimentation behind the scenes. Potters began layering white and purple mineral pigments over the black figures to highlight details: glistening armor, flowing wine, the pale skin of women. The François vase, a monumental crater covered with over 200 figures, shows just how far the technique could stretch. Every inch tells a different story: Theseus battling the Minotaur, chariots racing, gods feasting. It's a visual encyclopedia of Greek culture, proving that black figure wasn't just a method, it was a language. Yet for all its brilliance, the technique had limits. Painting inside rigid silhouettes meant less freedom for realism or perspective. That's why the next generation of artists would push boundaries even further with red figure pottery, but that's a story for later. For now, let's savor the boldness of black figure, the way it turned vases into theaters, where every hero's struggle and every god's whims played out in stunning black and red. These works weren't just admired in their time, they were traded across the Mediterranean, inspiring cultures from Etruria to Egypt. When you see one today, you're witnessing the moment Greek art learned to speak in shadows and light. Just when it seemed Greek vase painting couldn't become more expressive, along came the red figure technique, a breakthrough that turned the entire art form upside down, quite literally. Instead of painting black figures onto red clay, artists now did the opposite. They filled the background with glossy black slip, letting the figures emerge in the natural reddish-brown hue of the clay itself. This simple reversal unlocked possibilities earlier artisans could only dream of. With a fine-tipped brush, painters could now add delicate details directly onto the figure's tousled hair, the curve of a smile, even the tension in a sprinter's muscles mid-race. Suddenly, the rigid silhouettes of black figure gave way to flowing, lifelike forms that seemed to breathe. One of the earliest masters of this style, the Andocides painter, didn't just adopt the technique. He showcased its potential by experimenting with both styles side by side on the same vase. Imagine seeing Hercules wrestle the lion twice, once in traditional black figure, stiff and formal, then again in red figure, where every straining tendon and flying mane pulses with energy. The difference was undeniable. Soon, workshops across Athens embraced the innovation, and names like Euphronios and the Berlin painter became synonymous with this new realism. Their works didn't just depict myths, they captured fleeting human moments: a youth tying his sandal, a goddess glancing over her shoulder with playful mischief. What made red figure truly revolutionary was its ability to suggest depth and dimension. Artists used diluted glaze to create subtle shading, making fabric appear sheer or muscles rounded with light and shadow. On a cup by Dowris, you can almost feel the weight of a discus in an athlete's hand, his body coiled with potential energy. Another vase shows the god Hermes in mid-stride, his cloak billowing as if caught by an actual breeze. These weren't static images anymore, they were frozen instants, charged with movement and emotion. but perhaps the most striking evolution was in storytelling itself. Freed from the constraints of incised lines, painters could compose complex, multi-figure scenes with overlapping forms and dramatic perspectives. The Niobe painter's crater, for example, places figures at varying heights, suggesting a rocky landscape where Apollo and Artemis unleash their arrows. It's a far cry from the flat, tiered compositions of earlier periods. Even quieter scenes gained intimacy. A tender moment between a mother and child on a lakythos feels palpable, their expressions conveying warmth without a single etched line. This wasn't just technical prowess, it was a shift in how the Greeks saw their world. The gods looked more human, heroes more vulnerable, and everyday life more worthy of immortalization. By the time the red figure technique reached its peak in the 5th century B.C., it had transformed pottery from a craft into a medium rivaling fresco or sculpture. And as we'll see in the masterpieces ahead, that transformation wasn't just about beauty. It was about capturing the very essence of what it meant to be alive in ancient Greece, an essence that still resonates across millennia. Behind every masterpiece, there was a skilled artisan whose name might have been lost to time, if not for those bold enough to sign their work. While countless Greek vases were crafted by unknown artists, a handful of signatures have survived, turning these creators from shadows into personalities we can almost glimpse. Take Exekias, for instance, whose name appears on some of the most striking black figure vases in history. This wasn't just pride, it was a declaration. When he inscribed, "Exekias made and painted me," on an amphora showing Achilles and Penthesilea locked in combat, he was staking a claim not just as a potter, but as a storyteller. His compositions balanced drama and emotion with geometric precision, like a playwright staging a tragedy on clay. Then there's Euphronios, a pioneer of the red figure technique whose work redefined realism. His signature often came with playful boasts. One vase cheekily declares it's as beautiful as Euphronios could make it. And he wasn't wrong. Study the muscles of Heracles on his calyx crater, each sinew rendered with anatomical accuracy that rivals later Renaissance art. What's fascinating is how these artists interacted too. Some scholars believe Euphronios and his rival Euthymides engaged in friendly competition, each trying to outdo the other in capturing dynamic poses. Euthymides even scrawled "never before" by Euphronios beneath a twisting figure of a reveler, as if tossing down a creative gauntlet. The Brygos painter, though his real name remains unknown, left another kind of legacy. His workshop produced drinking cups with scenes so lively they seemed to shimmer with movement, satyr plays frozen mid-leap, symposia where you can almost hear the laughter. Unlike Exekias' solemn heroes, the Brygos painter embraced whimsy, filling his compositions with cheeky details like a satyr stealing wine or a goddess rolling her eyes at a mortal's folly. Yet, even without a signature, his style is unmistakable. Fluid brushwork, exaggerated expressions, and a knack for capturing the hilarious and the divine in equal measure. Deciphering these artists' lives is like piecing together a mosaic from scattered fragments. Some signatures include their deme, their home district hinting at community ties. Others reveal collaborations, like when a potter and painter worked as a team. And then there are the mysteries, like the so-called Berlin painter, whose name we'll never know but whose elegant, solitary figures on white backgrounds set a new standard for grace. What unites them all is that they didn't just make vases, they pushed boundaries, turning each piece into a conversation between artisan and viewer across millennia. So as we explore these 42 masterpieces, remember, every stroke of the brush was a choice, every signature a voice saying, "I was here," and thanks to their skill, they still are. Greek mythology didn't just live in temples or epic poems. It pulsed across the surfaces of everyday pottery, where gods and mortals clashed, loved, and schemed in strokes of black and red. Picture a young Athenian filling a cup with wine, glancing down to see Athena, her spear raised, springing fully formed from Zeus's forehead. Or imagine a mother pointing to a storage jar, using the painted scene of Heracles battling the Hydra to teach her child about courage. These weren't mere decorations, they were the ancient equivalent of storybooks, broadcasting the exploits of divine and heroic figures to anyone who held a vase. What's striking is how painters chose their moments. They didn't just show the obvious Heracles holding up the heavens, for instance, but the quieter, pivotal instants, the breath before the action, the glance heavy with meaning. Take the scene of Theseus abandoning Ariadne on Naxos. On one Amphora, the hero strides toward his ship, his face resolute, while the princess sleeps obliviously, her fate sealed by the curl of the painter's brush. It's a moment thick with moral complexity, inviting viewers to question loyalty and consequence. Similarly, depictions of the Trojan War often zoom in on Achilles binding Patroclus's wounds or Priam pleading for his son's body, scenes that humanize the epic, turning myth into emotional truth. The gods, too, were rendered with astonishing nuance. Dionysus might appear as a serene, long-haired youth holding a vine, or as a chaotic force surrounded by drunken satyrs, his eyes glinting with mischief. Zeus isn't always the thunder-wielding king. Sometimes he's a sly seducer, transforming into a swan to approach Leda, the feathers meticulously painted to blur the line between divine and animal. And then there's Athena, whose depictions range from a fierce warrior to a gentle protector guiding Odysseus home. These variations weren't accidents. They reflected local beliefs, cult practices, even political messages. A vase made in Sparta might emphasize Helen's beauty as a point of pride, while an Athenian workshop could paint her as a cautionary tale. But perhaps the most fascinating layer is how these myths intertwined with daily life. A symposium cup showing the judgment of Paris wasn't just a pretty scene, it sparked debates about desire and consequence among drinking companions. A funerary vase with Orpheus mourning Eurydice offered comfort, suggesting love could transcend death. Even humor crept in. One Skyphos shows Hera distracted by a mirror while Zeus sneaks off, a playful nod to marital strife that would have drawn laughs at a dinner party. These 42 masterpieces will show you mythology not as distant legend, but as a living, breathing force. Every brushstroke was a choice, to glorify, to question, to warn, or to console. And as you'll see, the stories they chose to tell reveal just as much about ancient Greece as the ones they left untold. Beyond the sweeping epics of gods and heroes, Greek vase painters turned their brushes toward something equally captivating: the quiet, bustling moments of everyday existence. These weren't just background details, they were vibrant portraits of a society in motion, where a farmer guiding his oxen or a woman weaving at her loom could hold as much artistic weight as Hercules battling a lion. Take the Panathenaic Amphory, prize vessels given to winners of athletic games. Their scenes of runners mid-stride or discus throwers coiled in tension aren't generic symbols, they're frozen instants of real competition, the dust of the stadium almost visible in the crisp black figures. Then there's the Symposium, Greece's version of a dinner party, where men reclined on couches debating philosophy, poetry, and politics over diluted wine. Vase paintings pull back the curtain on these gatherings, cups clinking, a flute girl playing in the corner, even the occasional drunk guest slumping over in exaggerated disgrace. One particularly lively kylix shows a reveler balancing precariously on one foot, his cup still raised in determination, a humorous nod to the night's excesses. These weren't just depictions of merriment, they reflected social codes, from the rituals of toasting to the delicate dance of host-guest etiquette. Women's lives, often overlooked in written histories, emerge vividly on pottery. A hydria might show water-bearers at a fountain house, their postures relaxed as they exchange gossip, their draped garments hinting at the textures of daily fabrics. On a pyxis, a delicate cosmetics box, young girls race with hoops, their hair streaming behind them in a whirl of motion that still feels fresh millennia later. Even chores became art. A woman kneading dough or folding clothes appears not as a mundane afterthought, but as a figure of quiet dignity, her role in the household honored by the painter's careful hand. What makes these scenes so revealing is their specificity. A black figure amphora doesn't just show a farmer, it depicts a bearded man guiding his plow through furrows, the oxen's muscles straining under detailed harnesses. Another vase captures a shoemaker at his bench, the tools of his trade arranged with archaeological precision. These artisans recorded their world with the eye of anthropologists, preserving everything from hairstyles to furniture designs that would otherwise have crumbled to dust. Perhaps most touching are the glimpses of intimacy. A chubby toddler reaches for a dog's tail on a tiny lekithos, their playful interaction timeless. A funerary plaque shows a family gathered around a grave, their gestures of grief and comfort achingly familiar. In these moments, the divide between ancient and modern collapses. We recognize ourselves in their laughter, their labor, their quiet acts of love. So as we explore these 42 masterpieces, remember, while myths tell us what the Greeks dreamed, these everyday scenes show us who they truly were. And that, in its own way, is just as extraordinary. The symposium wasn't just a party, it was a ritual, a carefully choreographed dance of wine, wit, and wisdom, and the pottery designed for these gatherings were its silent conductors. Picture a dimly lit andron, the men's dining room, where the air hummed with lyre strings and philosophical debate. At the center sat the crater, a broad mixing bowl where water and wine were blended to the perfect ratio, civilization tempering excess, quite literally painted onto the vessel's surface. Scenes of Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy, often swirled around its curves, a reminder that even in revelry, balance was divine. Then there were the kylixes, the shallow drinking cups designed not just to hold wine but to reveal their secrets as they were drained. A drinker might lift one to his lips only to discover the image of a satyr leering up at him from the tondo, the circular center, an inside joke between painter and guest. Some cups took this further, their exteriors showing dignified scenes of myth or athletics, while the interiors hid playful, even risque vignettes. It was art as surprise, a visual punchline reserved for the final sip. Music was as vital to these evenings as the wine, and vase painters captured its presence with astonishing dynamism. On a sicter, a vessel designed to float in the crater and keep wine cool, flute girls might be depicted mid-note, their fingers dancing over the pipes, their robes swaying as if moved by the very rhythm they created. Another kylix could show a symposiast reclining with his lyre, lost in melody, while a companion snaps his fingers to the beat, a snapshot of communal joy frozen in black figure or red figure glaze. But these scenes weren't just celebrations, they were social mirrors. A well-painted crater might show the ideal symposium, orderly, poetic, and refined, while a kylix could parody its excesses, a drunkard vomiting, a reveler stumbling over furniture, or a satyr overindulging to comic effect. Even the act of drinking became layered with meaning. The precise way a guest held his cup, whether by the stem or the bowl, signaled his sophistication, and the imagery reinforced these unspoken rules. A cup showing the wise centaur Chiron tutoring Achilles might remind drinkers to temper pleasure with learning, while one depicting Hercules' wild feasts could serve as a cautionary tale. Among our 42 masterpieces, look for the work of the Brygos painter, whose symposium scenes burst with energy. His tondo of a youth playing katobos, a game where drinkers flicked wine lees at targets, captures the exact moment of release, the droplets suspended in motion. Or the one Simos painter's delicate renderings of heterae, the cultured female companions who joined these gatherings, not as mere ornaments but as participants in song and debate. These vases didn't just accompany the symposium, they shaped it, guiding conversations, provoking laughter, and sometimes, like the best art, holding up a mirror to the drinker's own humanity. What's remarkable is how these vessels transcended their time. A modern viewer can still sense the warmth of the oil lamps, the tang of the resin-flavored wine, the way a shared joke might ripple through the room. The symposium vases weren't just artifacts, they were invitations to a world where every sip, every song, and every brushstroke was part of a larger conversation, one that still echoes today. For the ancient Greeks, death wasn't an end, it was a passage, and the vases they placed in tombs were both guides and companions for that journey. Among our 42 masterpieces, the funerary vessels stand apart, their painted scenes whispering across millennia about grief, hope, and the unbreakable threads between worlds. Take the white ground lakithos, a slender oil flask with a pale surface that seems to glow like moonlight. Unlike the bold red and black of symposium ware, these were painted with delicate washes of color figures that appear almost ethereal, as if already halfway to the afterlife. One stunning example shows a woman placing offerings at a grave stele, her robes flowing in soft, translucent layers, while a winged spirit hovers nearby. It's not just a scene of mourning, it's a promise that memory could bridge the divide between the living and the dead. Then there are the monumental crater vases from Athens' Dipylon cemetery, towering as high as a person and perforated with small holes. These weren't just containers, they were ceremonial markers, their intricate geometric bands framing scenes of funeral processions where mourners tear their hair in grief. The figures are stylized, almost ritualistic, but the emotion is raw and immediate. Look closely, and you'll notice how the painter emphasized hands clasped in prayer, raised in lament, or gently touching the shrouded body. Every gesture speaks a language of loss that needs no translation. Mythology, too, offered comfort through these vessels. A volute crater might show Heracles leading the grieving Alcestis back from the underworld, her veil lifted as if to say death could be undone by love. On a smaller pyxis, Persephone rises from Hades each spring, her return mirroring the cycle of seasons and the hope of renewal. Even the terrifying ferryman Charon appears, not as a monster but as a quiet oarsman waiting to guide souls across the river Styx, his feet a coin placed in the deceased's mouth painted with solemn precision. But perhaps the most intimate are the vases that depict ordinary farewells. A child's lakithos shows a mother bending to kiss her infant one last time, her profile tender against the white clay. Another portrays a warrior clasping hands with his elderly father, their locked gaze saying more than words ever could. These weren't grand public monuments, they were private keepsakes meant to cradle grief in beauty. What's extraordinary is how these funerary vases balanced sorrow with solace. The same brush that painted tears could also daub a sprouting flower, symbol of life persisting. A scene of parting might include a small dog, its loyalty stretching beyond death. Every image, every symbol was a thread in the tapestry of belief. That love didn't end, that memory was a kind of immortality. As you'll see in the masterpieces ahead, these vessels weren't just about death. They were about what it means to be human, to mourn, to hope, and to leave behind something as enduring as a painted vase cradled in the earth for thousands of years. Imagine standing in the dust of the Panathenaic stadium, your muscles still burning from the sprint, your ears ringing with the crowd's roar, and then, as the ultimate honor, being handed a towering amphora, its curves gleaming with the image of Athena herself. This wasn't just a trophy, it was a sacred object, a vessel of olive oil pressed from the very trees of Attica, its value equal to a small fortune. The Panathenaic Amphory were more than prizes. They were capsules of civic pride, religious devotion, and athletic glory, all painted onto clay with a precision that spanned generations. What's astonishing is how little these vases changed over 600 years, from the 6th century B.C. Well into the Roman era, the formula stayed sacred. The goddess Athena Promachos, spear in hand, striding fiercely on one side, while the other showcased the event you'd conquered, wrestlers locked in a grapple, chariots thundering around the turn, or the tense moment before a javelin's release. Even the inscriptions followed tradition, declaring in bold letters, "I am one of the prizes from Athens," a phrase as unchanging as the games themselves. This wasn't artistic stagnation, it was a deliberate link to the past, a visual thread connecting every victor to the legends who came before. But look closer and you'll spot the subtle innovations. Early black figure examples, like the Bergen Amphora in the British Museum, show Athena's owl perched solemnly beside her, while later red figure versions add dynamic twists, the goddess's aegis billowing as if caught in a breeze, or athletes rendered with anatomical precision that would make a sculptor pause. The events themselves evolved too. Pancration, that brutal mix of boxing and wrestling, appears on later vases, its bloody intensity softened only by the painter's graceful lines. The olive oil inside was as symbolic as the imagery. Harvested from Athena's sacred groves, it represented the goddess's gift to her city, a literal liquid gold. For the athlete, it was practical wealth. A single amphora could hold enough oil to feed a family for months or be traded across the Mediterranean. Yet for Athens, these vases were propaganda. Shipped far and wide, they broadcast the city's power and prestige, their standardized designs ensuring anyone from Sicily to Syria would recognize Athenian excellence. Among our 42 masterpieces, the Panathenaic Amphory stand out not just for their beauty, but for what they reveal about Greek values. Winning wasn't merely about personal fame. It was about honoring your polis, pleasing the gods, and etching your name into an unbroken lineage of heroes. When you see one today, you're not just looking at a vase, you're holding the weight of a champion's dream, a city's pride, and an artist's unwavering hand across centuries. The François vase doesn't just command attention, it demands it, a sprawling black figure crater that feels less like a pottery vessel and more like an epic poem cast in clay. Unearthed in 1844 by archaeologist Alessandro François, this masterpiece is the work of two names that have echoed through millennia: Ergotimos, the potter who shaped its elegant curves, and Clatius, the painter who brought its surfaces to life with over 200 figures dancing, battling, and grieving across 6 meticulously arranged mythological bands. What makes it extraordinary isn't just the sheer density of stories, it's how those stories talk to one another, each scene a carefully chosen verse in a larger visual hymn to Greek culture. Start at the top where the Caledonian boar hunt unfolds, heroes and hounds converging on the monstrous beast in a whirl of spears and tension. Just below, Achilles' chariot races around the funeral games for Patroclus, the horses' manes flying as if caught in an eternal wind. Then comes Theseus slaying the Minotaur, the youthful hero's calm focus contrasting with the beast's agonized thrashing, a single moment frozen mid-strike, yet pulsing with movement. Everywhere you look, Clatius' genius for detail astonishes. The intricate folds of drapery, the individual feathers on winged gods, even the delicate wreaths adorning revelers in the wedding of Peleus and Thetis. This wasn't just decoration, it was a narrative symphony, each band a movement building toward something greater. What's often overlooked is the vase's structure, how its shape enhances the storytelling. The widest middle band, where the wedding procession marches, mirrors the crater's own swelling belly, drawing the eye to the central myth. Meanwhile, the narrow neck focuses attention on smaller, more intimate scenes, like the gods arriving as guests or the tragic tale of Troilus ambushed by Achilles. Even the handles play a role, framing Ajax carrying Achilles' body with a solemnity that turns them into pillars of grief. This level of compositional harmony wasn't accidental. It was a masterclass in visual rhythm, proving that Ergotimos and Clatius understood their medium as sculptors understand marble. Yet for all its grandeur, the François vase is also curiously human. Amidst the gods and heroes, you'll find quiet jokes like Dionysus' comically exaggerated grin as he leads Hephaestus back to Olympus on a donkey. Or the way Clatius signed his work not once, but 3 times, each inscription tucked into the design like a proud artist's signature on a canvas. These touches remind us that behind the mythic spectacle were real hands, craftsmen who could blend reverence with playfulness, who saw pottery not as a surface to cover, but as a world to populate. Today, the vase survives in fragments, painstakingly reassembled after a museum accident in 1900. But even its scars tell a story, one of resilience, of art's refusal to fade. When you stand before it, you're not just seeing a relic, you're witnessing the moment Greek vase painting declared itself a rival to poetry, capable of holding entire universes within the curve of fired clay. Among our 42 masterpieces, it stands as a testament to what happens when technique, ambition, and sheer creative joy collide, a symphony in black and red that still sings across 25 centuries. Standing taller than most people who viewed it, the Dipylon Amphora wasn't just a grave marker. It was a statement, a towering testament to grief and status that dominated the Athenian cemetery landscape. Picture this: over 5 feet of clay, its surface a mesmerizing grid of zigzags, meanders, and concentric circles so precise they seem to pulse with rhythm. But what makes this 8th century B.C. masterpiece revolutionary isn't just its size or geometric perfection, it's the tiny, almost hidden figures tucked between those patterns. For the first time, artists began weaving human forms into the abstract tapestry, turning mathematical precision into storytelling. Look closely at the central band, and you'll spot the mourners with triangular torsos and stick-like arms raised in lament, their hands pulling at their hair in a gesture so universal it needs no caption. Beneath them lies the deceased, stretched out on a bier, surrounded by what might be the earliest depiction of a Greek funeral procession. The figures are schematic, yes, but their emotion is raw and immediate. This was the moment Greek pottery began its shift from decoration to narration, from pattern to people. Every line, every checkerboard band served a dual purpose: to honor the dead and to guide the living through the rituals of loss. The amphora's sheer scale tells its own story. Crafting something this monumental required not just technical skill, but immense resources, clay mined and purified, kilns large enough to fire it without cracking, and pigments painstakingly mixed to withstand the flames. That it survived intact for nearly 3,000 years is a miracle. Archaeologists found it in Athens' Kerameikos Cemetery, the Potter's Quarter, whose name gives us the word ceramic, and its discovery in 1871 sent shockwaves through the art world. Here was proof that the Greeks' geometric period wasn't just about symmetry, it was the foundation for everything that followed. What's often overlooked is how democratic this artistry was. While the amphora likely marked a noble's grave, its motifs, the checkerboards, the key patterns, appeared on humbler pots too, suggesting a shared visual language across classes. Even in death, the vase connected the elite to the everyday, its grandeur elevating communal grief into something monumental. And when sunlight hits its surface just right, those geometric lines seem to vibrate, as if the vase itself is humming with the voices of those long gone. Among our 42 masterpieces, the Dipylon Amphora stands as a bridge between worlds, between abstraction and humanity, between the silent precision of mathematics and the messy, beautiful noise of human stories. It reminds us that every great artistic tradition begins with a single, daring step, the decision to make shapes not just perfect but meaningful. And in those slender, grieving figures, we see the first flicker of what would become the flame of Greek art, a flame that would one day illuminate Hercules' labors, Athena's wisdom, and the laughter of symposiums yet to come. In a world where many Greek vase painters filled every inch of clay with bustling crowds and elaborate myths, the Berlin painter dared to do something radical. He let his figures breathe. Picture a solitary athlete, his body coiled in motion against a vast expanse of glossy black glaze. No distracting scenery, no crowded sidelines, just the pure, unadorned beauty of human form in perfect tension. This was the genius of an artist whose real name we'll never know, identified only by a magnificent amphora once housed in Berlin's antiquities collection. Where others shouted, he whispered, and in that whisper he redefined elegance. His signature style was simplicity itself, one or two figures often placed off-center, their contours flowing with such precision they seemed to pulse with life. Take his famous amphora showing Hermes, the messenger god, gliding forward with effortless grace. Every curve of his winged sandal, every ripple in his cloak speaks of motion, yet the composition feels serene, almost meditative. The Berlin painter understood what so many forget, that empty space isn't wasted space. By stripping away excess, he turned each vase into a stage where every glance, every gesture carried weight. What's astonishing is how he achieved such depth without clutter. Instead of layered backgrounds, he used subtle details, a draped cloak hinting at wind, a tilted head suggesting unseen conversation. His Apollo holding a lyre isn't just playing music. He's lost in it, his eyes half closed, the strings almost vibrating under the painter's brush. Even his satyrs, typically wild and raucous in other artists' hands, become studies in balance, their mischievous energy contained within flawless lines. The technical mastery behind this less is more approach was staggering. Red figure painting already allowed for finer detail than black figure, but the Berlin painter pushed it further. His brushstrokes could render the softness of a youth's curls or the taut sinews of a runner's legs with equal finesse, and his control of dilution using thinner glaze to create translucent effects gave his figures an almost three-dimensional presence. Among our 42 masterpieces, his works stand out like pauses in a symphony. A Lakithos with a lone Nike, her wings swept back as if caught mid-flight. A volute crater where Dionysus lingers, one hand resting on his hip, the other cradling a vine, a god at ease in his own skin. These aren't just vases, they're invitations to slow down, to appreciate the poetry of a single, perfectly captured moment. In an age obsessed with spectacle, the Berlin painter's quiet confidence feels more revolutionary than ever. He reminds us that true artistry isn't about filling the canvas, it's about knowing what to leave out. And in that restraint, he created something timeless, beauty that doesn't overwhelm but lingers, like the last note of a song you can't quite forget. The Niobid crater doesn't just tell a story, it plunges you into the heart of a myth so visceral you can almost hear the screams. Picture the scene: Apollo, his bow taut, arrows aimed at Niob's sons as they scramble in vain. Artemis, her face a mask of divine fury, draws her own bow against the daughters. Bodies twist and fall, limbs caught mid-collapse, their terror etched in every brushstroke. This isn't just a painting, it's a moral reckoning frozen in clay, a warning about the dangers of pride that would have struck deep in ancient Greek hearts. What makes this crater revolutionary isn't just its brutality, but how the painter known only as the Niobid painter orchestrated the chaos. Earlier vases stacked figures in neat rows like actors on a stage. Here, the artist dares to scatter them across an imagined landscape. A sun crumples at the base of a sloping hill, his body overlapping a rock as if the painter wanted you to feel the weight of the terrain. Another victim lunges forward, his pose so dynamic you half expect him to tumble right off the vase. For the first time, Greek pottery breathes with the illusion of depth, each figure occupying space as if they were moving through real air. The emotional power lies in the details. Apollo's calm, almost detached expression contrasts with the mortal agony around him, a chilling reminder that to the gods, this isn't murder but justice. Niobe, the proud mother who boasted her children outnumbered Letos, is conspicuously absent. Her empty space at the center speaks louder than any wailing figure could. The painter forces us to imagine her horror, making the punishment feel even more cruel. Yet amid the violence, there's breathtaking artistry. The drapery of Artemis Chiton flows with such precision, you can trace the wind's direction. The fallen youth's muscles tense and slacken with anatomical accuracy that rivals later Renaissance sketches, and the composition, a masterclass in balance, guides your eye in a grim circle, ensuring no victim's plight goes unnoticed. This crater wasn't meant for casual display. Found in a tomb in Orvieto, Italy, it likely served as a funerary offering, its myth echoing the fragility of human life. For modern viewers, it's a gateway to understanding Greek values. Respect the gods, cherish humility, and remember that even the mightiest can fall. Among our 42 masterpieces, the Niobid crater stands as a testament to how vase painters could wield myth not just as decoration, but as a mirror to the soul, one that still reflects our own fears and flaws today. The Achilles and Ajax vase captures a moment so disarmingly human, it stops you in your tracks. Here are two of the greatest warriors of Greek legend: Achilles, the near-invincible demigod, and Ajax, his steadfast comrade hunched over a wooden game board, their spears leaning forgotten against a tent pole. Exekias, the master painter behind this 6th century B.C. Amphora, doesn't show them mid-battle or draped in glory. Instead, he freezes them in a quiet interval, their brows furrowed not in anger but in concentration, fingers poised above the dice. The scene feels almost modern, like catching a glimpse of soldiers sharing a card game between skirmishes. That's the genius of Exekias. He understood that heroism isn't just about epic deeds, but about the unguarded moments in between. Look closer and the details pull you deeper. Ajax's helmet is tipped back, revealing his sweat-damp hair, while Achilles still wears his, as if ready to spring into action at any second. Their postures mirror each other, knees nearly touching, creating a circle of intimacy that excludes the chaos of war. The game itself, possibly a precursor to backgammon, is rendered with meticulous precision, the playing pieces and dice carved into the black glaze with needle-fine line. But it's their expressions that haunt you. Ajax, ever the steady one, counts his moves with calm focus, while Achilles' lips part slightly, as if whispering a taunt or a wager. Exekias gives us their rivalry without a single drop of blood, just the crackle of playful tension. What makes this vase extraordinary is how it plays with expectation. Greek art loved spectacle, Hercules wrestling lions, Odysseus blinding the Cyclops. Yet here, the drama is internal, a psychological chess match between friends who know their fates. Ajax will fall on his own sword. Achilles is destined to die young. The painter layers this knowledge into every stroke. Notice how Achilles' shield looms behind them, its Gorgon face glaring, a reminder that death is always near, even in respite. The composition balances this foreboding with warmth, the curve of the amphora's belly cradling the scene like a protective embrace. Among our 42 masterpieces, this amphora stands apart because it doesn't shout, it lingers. It asks us to consider what myth often overlooks: the friendships that sustained heroes, the games that distracted them from doom. When Exekias signed his name proudly below the scene, he wasn't just claiming credit. He was inviting us to pull up a stool and join the game, to see these legends not as marble statues, but as men who laughed, strategized, and briefly forgot the war outside their tent. And in that, he gave us something timeless, a reminder that even the mightiest warriors were, at heart, profoundly human. The Siren Vase pulls us into one of mythology's most haunting moments, Odysseus straining against the ropes that bind him to the mast, his body arched toward the unseen sirens as their lethal song washes over the ship. What makes this Lakithos extraordinary isn't just the scene it depicts, but how the painter compressed an epic's worth of tension into a few square inches of clay. The crew, their ears stuffed with wax, row with mechanical focus, their backs turned to both their captain and the danger. Odysseus' face is a masterpiece of contradiction, eyes wide with yearning, muscles taut against the cords, his mouth possibly mid-command or mid-plea. You don't hear the siren's music, you feel it in the curve of his spine, the desperation in his fingers. This vase isn't merely illustrating a story, it's dissecting the human condition. The sirens promised knowledge, not just seduction. Their song was said to reveal all the secrets of the world, making Odysseus struggle not just against enchantment, but against the unbearable weight of curiosity. The painter understood this duality. Notice how the hero's bonds aren't crude restraints. They're meticulously coiled, almost elegant, as if to underscore that his captivity is self-imposed, a pact with his own wisdom. Meanwhile, the sea swirls beneath the ship in tight, rhythmic spirals, echoing both the siren's hypnotic melody and the oar's relentless strokes. Technically, the piece is a marvel of economy. With only black figure silhouettes and a few incised lines, the artist creates layers of movement: the crew's synchronized rowing, the billow of the sail, even the implied flutter of invisible wings just beyond the frame. The mast divides the composition like a moral axis. Left of it, the disciplined crew embodies survival. Right, Odysseus dangles between ecstasy and ruin. It's a visual parable about the cost of leadership and the loneliness of resisting what others cannot hear. Found in Attica but likely inspired by tales sung at symposia, this Lakithos would have held precious oil, perhaps anointing the dead with its imagery of peril and resilience. Today, it resonates as a metaphor for any impossible choice. The artist's genius was to make Odysseus' agony feel immediate, his ropes as visceral as the chains of modern temptation. Among our 42 masterpieces, it stands as proof that great art doesn't need scale to convey enormity. Sometimes the smallest vessels carry the weightiest truths. The Theseus Kylix isn't just a drinking vessel, it's a labyrinth of storytelling genius, designed to unfold its secrets with every sip. Picture a symposium guest lifting this shallow cup, its exterior painted with Theseus' early trials, the wrestler Kyrkion crumpled at his feet, the bandit Procrust sprawled across his infamous bed. But the real magic lies inside, in the tondo, the circular center where the hero confronts the Minotaur, his blade poised as the beast staggers backward. What makes this masterpiece unforgettable is how the painter played with the cup's shape. The round frame becomes the very walls of the labyrinth, trapping viewer and monster alike in its tightening spiral, while Theseus' outstretched limbs echo the curve of the bowl, turning the act of drinking into participation in the myth. This kylix transforms a social ritual into interactive theater. As wine drained away, the scenes would reveal themselves in sequence, first the hero's youthful victories, then the climactic battle, and finally, at the bottom, perhaps Ariadne's thread or the triumphant sail home. The painter didn't just decorate a cup, he choreographed a reveal, ensuring each guest became an active witness to Theseus' journey. The technical skill here is staggering. Painting on a curved surface required foresight. Every stroke had to align perfectly when viewed from above, with perspective adjusted for the drinker's sightline. Even the red figure technique was pushed further, using diluted glaze to create shadows on the Minotaur's fur and the rough texture of the labyrinth stones. Beyond its artistry, the kylix whispers about Athenian identity. Theseus wasn't just a mythic figure, he was Athens' legendary king, his exploits symbolizing the city's ideals of cunning and courage. In a symposium where politics and philosophy mingled with wine, this cup was more than entertainment, it was propaganda. Imagine the host passing it to a visiting diplomat, its imagery silently declaring Athenian superiority. Yet there's intimacy too, the depiction of Theseus lifting the boulder to retrieve his father's sword, a moment of private resolve, would have resonated with any young aristocrat facing his own coming of age. Among our 42 masterpieces, the Theseus kylix stands out not just for its beauty, but for its audacity. It turns a simple act drinking into a dialogue between mortal and myth, between the hand holding the cup and the hero frozen in clay. Every rotation of the vessel becomes a step deeper into the story, proving that great art doesn't just hang on walls. Sometimes it waits at the bottom of a wine cup, ready to pull you into its world. The Medea's Hydria doesn't just depict a garden, it invites you to step inside one, where every leaf, every fold of fabric, every glance between figures feels alive with delicate intention. Picture this, Aphrodite lounges beneath a canopy of vines, her drapery pooling around her in soft, translucent waves, while Helen of Troy reaches for a necklace offered by Eros, his tiny wings fluttering with mischievous energy. Around them, golden apples hang heavy from gnarled branches, and nymphs pause mid-dance, their flowing hair catching an unseen breeze. This isn't merely decoration. It's a window into an idealized world where divinity and beauty intertwine, painted with such finesse that you half expect the scene to sigh with life if you lean too close. What sets Medea's apart isn't just the density of detail, it's how he balanced it. Where earlier red figure artists might crowd a composition, he arranged his figures in graceful arcs, their poses echoing the Hydria's curves like a choreographed dance. Notice how Aphrodite's relaxed posture mirrors the slope of the vessel's shoulder, while the nymph's swirling robes mimic the motion of water this jar was meant to carry. Even the garden itself feels meticulously planned, pomegranates symbolizing fertility, ivy trailing toward Hercules' clubber, a nod to his role in the Hesperides myth. Every element serves dual purpose, blending storytelling with sheer visual pleasure. The technical mastery here is staggering. Medea's used diluted glaze to create effects earlier painters hadn't dreamed possible. The sheer fabric of Helen's peplos clinging to her limbs, the dappled shade under trees rendered in faint, wispy strokes. His incised lines were so fine they could depict individual strands of hair or the veins on a butterfly's wing near the handles. And then there's the gold. Applied after firing, it highlights jewelry, apple stems, even the god Hermes' winged sandals, catching the light as the Hydria was lifted or tilted. This wasn't just pottery, it was multimedia artistry, pushing clay's potential to its limits. Yet for all its opulence, the Hydria whispers intimacy. The way Aphrodite's fingers brush Adonis' shoulder, or how Helen's gaze lingers on the necklace, a possible allusion to the Trojan War's looming tragedy, shows Medea's genius for narrative nuance. Unlike the grand action of battle scenes, these quiet interactions reward slow viewing, their emotions unfolding like petals, found in Italy but crafted in Athens around 400 B.C. The vase's survival feels miraculous. Its fragile beauty, meant to shimmer with water at some ancient well, now carries the weight of centuries, a testament to one painter's ability to make clay breathe with myth and humanity alike. Among our 42 masterpieces, it stands as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful stories aren't shouted, they're murmured, drawing you close until you forget you're looking at fired earth and see only a world in bloom. The warrior stands motionless, his spear grounded beside him, as the woman clutches his shoulders with a grip that seems to tremble through the clay. Her forehead presses against his chest, her flowing hair merging with the folds of his cloak as if trying to bind him there through sheer will. Around them, the painter leaves only emptiness, no battlefield, no cheering comrades, no looming ships, just this suspended moment of farewell, raw and unadorned. What makes this scene so devastating isn't the drama of tears or grand gestures, but the quiet tension in their stillness. His hand hovers near her arm, not quite embracing, not quite pulling away, capturing that unbearable space between duty and desire. This vase stands apart because it dares to focus on intimacy in a world that usually celebrated heroism in broad strokes. Unlike the triumphant departures on other Amphory where warriors march off to glory amid crowds and fanfare, here, the painter zooms in on the human cost of war. The woman's fingers dig into the warrior's tunic, her posture echoing funerary reliefs where mourners grasp at the dead, as if she already senses the loss to come. The warrior's face, though composed, carries a shadow in the curve of his brow, a detail so subtle you might miss it until you lean closer. This isn't just a generic soldier, it's someone's son, someone's lover, a man with a name and a history, frozen in the last moment he'll ever be ordinary. Technically, the piece is a masterclass in restraint. The painter used the barest minimum of incised lines, a single stroke to define the woman's downturned lips, a few wisps of glaze to suggest the texture of the warrior's beard. The composition's simplicity, the way their bodies form a single, unified shape against the negative space, makes the emotion universal. You don't need to know Greek to understand this grief. It transcends language, culture, even time. Found in a tomb in Etruria, the vase likely held offerings for the dead, its imagery serving as both tribute and warning. Glory is fleeting, but love leaves its mark. Among our 42 masterpieces, this Amphora resonates because it doesn't shout, it whispers. In a single embrace, it holds all the untold stories of ancient wars, the mothers who waited, the lovers who prayed, the soldiers who never came home. And in that whisper, it speaks louder than any epic poem ever could. The god of wine never arrives quietly. He erupts onto the scene in a whirl of grapevines and laughter, his entourage of satyrs and maenads spinning the very air into chaos. That's the magic of Dionysian vases. Where other gods demand solemnity, Dionysus invites abandon, and the artists who painted him leaned into the frenzy with brushstrokes that practically dance. Take the famous Cup of the Dancing Satyrs, where the goat-legged followers of the god leap in an eternal circle, their exaggerated grins and arching backs radiating pure, unbridled joy. The painter didn't just depict movement, he bottled its essence, arranging the figures so their limbs overlap in a blur of motion that makes you hear the thrum of tambourines and the stomp of bare feet. What's striking is how these scenes balance chaos with meticulous control. A Maenad might fling her head back in ecstasy, her hair whipping like storm-tossed waves, but every strand is incised with precision. Dionysus himself often lounges at the center, a picture of serene indulgence amidst the storm, his relaxed posture contrasting with the frenzy around him. On the François vase, he rides a donkey led by Hephaestus, his expression hovering between amusement and divine detachment, a reminder that even in revelry, the god is never truly unmoored. These compositions aren't haphazard, they're carefully orchestrated symphonies of excess, where every drunken grin and upturned wine cup serves the story. The humor in these vases is another revelation. Satyrs with their potbellies and permanent leers are the comic relief of Greek myth, and vase painters adored exaggerating their antics. One particularly playful amphora shows a satyr trying and failing to carry a wineskin twice his size, his stubby legs buckling under the weight while his companions point and laugh. Another kylix hides a cheeky scene inside its tondo, a satyr sneaking up on a sleeping Maenad, his expression caught between mischief and terror at being caught. These aren't just decorative flourishes, they're glimpses into how the Greeks viewed the intersection of the sacred and the silly, proving that devotion could wear a grin as easily as a solemn mask. But beneath the laughter lies something profound. Maenads, the mortal women who followed Dionysus, weren't just partygoers, they were conduits of divine power, capable of superhuman feats in their trance-like states. On a volute crater from Apulia, a Maenad tears apart a fawn with her bare hands, her face transfigured by something beyond mortal joy. The painter captures the duality of Dionysian worship, ecstasy tipping into terror, liberation bordering on destruction. These vases weren't mere decorations, they were visual hymns to a god who embodied life's most intoxicating contradictions, the bliss and the brutality, the laughter and the longing. Among our 42 masterpieces, the Dionysian vases stand out because they refuse to be still. Even now, centuries later, the satyrs still prance, the Maenads still whirl, and the god still lifts his cup in endless toast. They remind us that Greek art wasn't just about ideals of beauty or heroism. It was about the messy, glorious, untamable pulse of being alive, and in that they feel startlingly modern, an invitation to revel in the moment, just as their first viewers did, with wine stains on their lips and the night humming with possibility. The golden apple gleams at the center of the composition, its polished surface catching the light as if charged with divine energy. Paris, the shepherd prince of Troy, hesitates just a moment before reaching for it, his fingers suspended between three goddesses who each lean forward with barely contained urgency. Hera's regal posture radiates authority, her peplos draped in perfect folds, while Athena's spear and helmet mark her as the embodiment of strategic might. But it's Aphrodite who steals the scene, her body curved in effortless grace, one hand casually adjusting her necklace as if already confident of victory. This is the judgment of Paris, captured on a 6th century B.C. Amphora with such psychological tension that you can almost hear the whispered promises, Hera offering kingdoms, Athena vowing glory, and Aphrodite pledging the most beautiful woman in the world. What makes this mythological moment so compelling on Greek vases isn't just the drama, it's the layers of meaning packed into every glance and gesture. The painter could have shown Paris as a passive recipient of divine bribes, but instead, he gives the Trojan prince palpable agency. His furrowed brow and weighted stance suggest genuine deliberation, turning the scene into a meditation on choice and consequence. The goddesses, too, defy simple caricature. Athena's stern expression softens at the edges with something like vulnerability, while Hera's usual majesty is undercut by the slight strain in her outstretched arm. Even Aphrodite's confidence carries an edge, her famous beauty weaponized, her coy smile hinting at the chaos to come. The composition itself is a masterclass in visual storytelling. Paris sits off-center, the three goddesses fanning out around him like spokes of a wheel, their competing claims made spatial. The apple forms the focal point, but the painter directs our eye through subtler details, the way Hera's scepter points accusingly at Aphrodite, or how Athena's shield reflects distorted fragments of the scene, as if mirroring the fractured loyalties at play. And then there's the backdrop, a sparse landscape with a single gnarled tree, its twisted branches echoing the moral complexity of Paris' decision. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect is how these vases reflect Greek societal values. The judgment wasn't just a myth, it was a cultural touchstone that explored uncomfortable truths about power, desire, and the cost of favoritism. On a symposium cup, the scene might spark debates about whether Paris chose wisely. Could love ever outweigh political alliance or martial prowess? A funerary lekithos showing the same moment carried darker undertones, reminding viewers that one man's choice could doom thousands. Among our 42 masterpieces, this Amphora stands as a testament to vase painting's narrative depth. It doesn't just illustrate a story, it interrogates it, inviting us to weigh the same impossible choices as Paris. And in the goddess's rival offerings, we see reflections of our own world where power, wisdom, and desire still collide, and every golden apple comes with consequences. The explosion of Athena's birth wasn't just a myth, it was a spectacle of divine paradox, and Greek vase painters seized its drama with breathtaking ingenuity. Picture the scene: Zeus, king of the gods, his brow split open by Hephaestus' axe, as Athena bursts forth not as a wailing infant but as a fully armored warrior, her spear already raised in defiance. This wasn't a gentle arrival, it was a cosmic eruption, and the artists who captured it understood its raw power. One particularly striking amphora freezes the instant of impact, Hephaestus' axe hovering mid-swing, Zeus recoiling in shock, and Athena's piercing gaze locking onto the world for the first time, her aegis flaring like a thunderclap. The composition thrums with motion, the curves of the vase amplifying the energy as if the clay itself can barely contain the scene. What's fascinating is how painters distilled Athena's dual nature into this single moment. Her birth isn't bloody or chaotic, it's precise, almost surgical, reflecting her domain over strategy and intellect. On a 6th century B.C. Hydria, she emerges not with a battle cry but with an aura of calm authority, her owl already perched on her outstretched hand like a living emblem of wisdom. Meanwhile, the other gods flank Zeus in a chorus of reactions, Ares stepping back in awe, Apollo lifting his lyre as if to hymn the miracle, and Hera's eyes narrowed with mingled resentment and respect. These details aren't just decorative, they're narrative genius, compressing entire theological debates into glances and postures. The axe itself becomes a symbol. Hephaestus, the limping smith god, is often depicted with a wry smile, his tool more a divine scalpel than a weapon. Some vases play with the moment's humor. One kylix shows him staggering backward from the force of his own strike, his muscular arms contrasting with his awkward stance. Yet even in comedy there's reverence. The split in Zeus' head mirrors the parting of clouds before lightning, tying Athena's birth to her role as the storm's mistress. And her armor, it's never generic. Corinthian helmets gleam with engraved curls, serpent-fringed aegises ripple with invisible wind, and spear points catch an otherworldly light, each detail a testament to the painter's awareness that this wasn't just any birth. It was the arrival of a force that would shape Athens itself. Among our 42 masterpieces, this scene stands out because it's not just mythology, it's metaphor. Athena's emergence from Zeus' mind became a visual shorthand for Greek ideals, wisdom forged in crisis, power tempered by reason. When Athenian potters exported these vases across the Mediterranean, they weren't just selling pottery, They were broadcasting their city's divine patron, her origin story a mirror of their own civic identity. And today, when we see that explosive moment frozen on clay, we're not just looking at a myth, we're witnessing how art could turn a god's birth into a city's manifesto. The calyx crater wasn't just a vessel, it was a stage, its sweeping curves and expansive surface offering painters a canvas rivaling the walls of temples. Shaped like an inverted bell with flaring lips and sturdy handles, this wasn't pottery meant to sit meekly on a shelf. It dominated the room, demanding attention, its generous proportions inviting artists to dream bigger. Imagine a painter's brush hovering over that bare clay, knowing they had space to unfurl entire epics, gods clashing in the heavens, choruses chanting in theatron circles, or the quiet aftermath of a hero's death. Where smaller vases might confine scenes to a single moment, the crater's grandeur allowed for layered storytelling figures stacked like verses in a hymn, each band of imagery building toward a crescendo. Take the legendary volute crater by the Niobid painter, where the artist turned the vessel's shoulder into a rolling landscape. Here, Apollo and Artemis rain arrows down upon Niob's children from a rocky outcrop, their divine wrath balanced by the mortal terror below. The crater's curvature mimics the hillside, creating an illusion of depth that flat panels couldn't achieve. Or consider the Euphronios crater, where the death of Sarpedon unfolds with cinematic-scale Hypnos and Thanatos lifting the fallen warrior, their wings framing the scene like a tragic proscenium. The handles, often overlooked, become part of the narrative. On one crater, they're flanked by grieving sirens, their mournful songs etched into the clay. What's often forgotten is how these craters functioned in real life. Designed to mix wine and water at symposia, they were centerpieces, their imagery sparking conversation as guests reclined around them. A crater showing the madness of Heracles might prompt debates about fate, while one depicting a satyr play could loosen tongues with laughter. The artists knew this. They painted with the viewer in mind, using the crater's shape to guide the eye. Scenes would reveal themselves gradually as the vessel was rotated. A twist of the wrist might unveil the punchline of a myth, or the tragic twist hidden on the reverse side. The technical challenges only heightened the creativity. Painting on a curved surface required foresight. Figures near the rim had to be elongated to avoid distortion when viewed from below, while central compositions needed anchors to prevent visual chaos. Some painters treated the crater's sections like acts in a play, the lip for prologues, gods observing mortal folly, the body for climax, the battle itself, and the foot for epilogue, the quiet cost of victory. Others played with contrast, pairing violent myths on one side with serene processions on the other, as if to remind drinkers that life's extremes were always in balance. Among our 42 masterpieces, the calyx craters stand as monuments to ambition. They didn't just hold wine, they held worlds, each brushstroke a defiance of limits, each curve a challenge to tell stories as sprawling and complex as the Greek imagination itself. And when the symposium's lamps burned low, those stories would flicker to life in the firelight, turning clay into a window where mortals could glimpse the divine. The Lakithos cradles grief in its slender form, a vessel so fragile its white ground paintings seemed to tremble on the surface like whispers. These weren't mere containers for oil, they were bridges between worlds, left in tombs to anoint the dead with beauty and memory. Imagine a mother kneeling in the Kerameikos cemetery, placing one beside her child's ashes, her fingers lingering on the scene painted there. A woman bending to tie a ribbon around a stele, her face a study in quiet sorrow. The painter didn't render tears, he didn't need to. The curve of her spine, the way her chitin pools around her as if even the fabric mourns, it's all there in a few deft strokes of diluted color. What makes these vases extraordinary is their ephemeral artistry. Unlike the bold black figure or red figure techniques, white ground lekythoi used a chalky clay slip as their canvas, with pigments so delicate they've often faded over millennia. Yet when preserved, the effect is luminous. A youth stands frozen mid-gesture, offering a toy to a small figure, perhaps his own younger self, remembered. Winged spirits hover like sighs, their feathers barely tinted with ochre, as if they might dissolve if stared at too long. These weren't paintings meant to last, they were acts of love, as transient as the oil they once held. The scenes themselves are intimate dialogues with loss. On one lekythos, a warrior clasps hands with his wife, their foreheads nearly touching, while their child tugs at her skirt, where this farewell is final. Another shows Charon, the underworld's ferryman, his boat moored as he waits with uncharacteristic patience, his skeletal hand outstretched not in menace but as a guide. Even the objects speak. A lyre leaned against a grave marker, its strings silent, a tiny bird alighting on a stele, its wings echoing the soul's flight. Among our 42 masterpieces, the lekythoi stand apart because they don't shout of heroism or myth. They murmur in the language of the everyday, of hands that once held those vessels, of voices that once called names now etched in stone. When you see one today, its pigments fragile as dried petals, you're not just looking at ancient pottery, you're witnessing the moment art became a hand reaching across time, saying, "I remember." I still remember. The white ground technique feels like a whisper compared to the bold declarations of black and red figure pottery, a shift from thunderous epic to lyrical elegy. Picture an artist brushing a thin slip of pale clay onto the surface of a lekythos, transforming it into a canvas as luminous as marble. Unlike the glossy black silhouettes or fiery red figures, this style embraced fragility, its pigments mixed with binders that allowed for washes of color so delicate they seemed to hover above the clay. A mourner's robe might blush with faint pink, the folds shaded with diluted brown to suggest fabric so thin it clings to the body beneath. Winged spirits flutter at the edges, their feathers traced in strokes so fine they'd vanish if you breathed too hard. What's extraordinary is how these vases married artistry with purpose. Found almost exclusively in graves, they weren't meant for the clamor of symposia or the rough handling of marketplaces. They were farewell gifts, their ephemeral beauty mirroring the fleeting nature of life itself. The Achilles painter, one of the finest masters of this style, captured this duality in his lekythoi. On one, a warrior stands at his tomb's edge, his armor gleaming with touches of gold leaf, while a youth offers him a helmet, not as a tool of war, but as a relic of memory. The background isn't empty, it's charged with absence, the white space becoming both sky and void. Technically, the process was a high-wire act. The pale slip cracked easily in the kiln, and the mineral pigments, ochre for skin tones, mint green for wreaths, faded if not handled with reverence. Yet the best painters turned these limitations into virtues. The Berlin painter's white ground works, for instance, use the fragility to their advantage. A mourner's tear might be a single stroke of gray, barely there, making the grief feel more intimate. And because the colors weren't fixed by glaze, artists could layer them like watercolors, achieving effects unseen elsewhere in Greek pottery. The translucent veil of a goddess, the dappled shade of a cypress tree. Among our 42 masterpieces, the white ground vases stand as quiet rebels. Where others shouted with contrast, they murmured with nuance. A kylix might show Apollo surrounded by muses, their faces rendered with the softness of fresco, their limbs warmed by peach tones that make the gods feel startlingly human. Or a pyxis depicting Persephone's return, her mother Demeter's cloak blooming with flowers painted in hues so tender they seem to wilt before your eyes. These works didn't just depict myths, they dissolved the boundary between art and emotion, letting the viewer complete the scene with their own breath. To hold one today is to cradle a paradox, clay fired to stone-like hardness, yet imagery so fragile it feels like holding a shadow. The white ground technique didn't just paint vases, it painted whispers, and in those whispers we hear the ancient Greeks speaking not of eternity, but of the exquisite, fleeting now. The Heron-class skyphos fits snugly in the palm of your hand, its modest size belying the wit and warmth packed into its curves. Unlike the grand craters and amphory that trumpet heroic deeds, this little cup whispers secrets turn it just so, and two herons materialize inside, their spindly legs frozen mid-step as if caught in a private dance. One bird cranes its neck toward the rim, beak parted as if to sip wine alongside the drinker, while its companion peers over its shoulder with an almost comical alertness. The painter didn't just depict birds, he gave them personalities, their feathers rendered with loose, joyful strokes that make them seem ready to flap right off the clay. What's enchanting here is the intimacy of the experience. Unlike Symposium where designed for communal revelry, this skyphos feels like a one-on-one conversation between artist and owner. The herons aren't framed by geometric borders or mythic tableaus there alone in the tondo. Their world nothing but negative space and the curve of the cup. To drink from it was to enter their quiet universe, the wine's dark surface becoming a pond reflecting their silhouettes with each sip. Even the name we've given it, Heron-class, hints at its singularity, a category created by modern scholars for this rare handful of cups that prioritize whimsy over grandeur. The humor is subtle but unmistakable. On one example, a heron clutches a tiny fish in its beak, the prey's tail flapping in a futile wriggle. Another shows a bird mid-preen, its neck coiled into a pretzel of avian vanity. These aren't the idealized creatures of religious symbolism, but characters mischievous, vain, endearingly awkward. It's a reminder that Greek artists didn't just venerate nature, they observed it with a storyteller's eye, finding delight in life's unscripted moments. Technically, the skyphos is a marvel of miniaturization. Painting inside such a small, curved space required brushes so fine they might have been single hairs, and a steady hand to render each feather without smudging the delicate glaze. The bird's elongated forms echo the cup's own proportions, their slender legs mirroring the skyphos's twin handles, a harmony of shape and subject that feels both playful and deliberate. Among our 42 masterpieces, this cup stands as a testament to art's power to elevate the everyday. No gods demand worship here, no heroes claw toward glory. Just two herons, a sip of wine, and the quiet joy of holding something made not for the ages, but for a single, smiling moment. The Antimenes painter's Amphora doesn't just depict an olive harvest, it sings one, the rhythmic sway of workers' bodies and the rustle of branches almost audible across millennia. Here, in bold black figure strokes, is a world far removed from the usual parade of gods and heroes. A ladder leans precariously against a gnarled tree, its trunk twisted with age, while a bearded man balances on the rungs, his arms outstretched to shake the branches. Below, another laborer crouches to gather the fallen fruit, his back bent in a curve that speaks of hours spent in the groves. The scene pulses with unpretentious dignity, each figure caught mid-motion as if the painter had wandered into an actual Athenian orchard and frozen a moment of uncelebrated toil. What makes this vase extraordinary is its refusal to romanticize. The olive harvest wasn't just a pastoral idyll, it was grueling, essential work, and the Antimenes painter honors that truth. Look closely and you'll see the tools rendered with archaeological precision. The curved picking rods, the woven baskets straining under the weight of fruit, even the cloth strips tied around workers' knees to protect against the rocky soil. These aren't generic props, they're artifacts of a specific way of life. The trees themselves are characters, their trunks knotted and individual, some heavy with fruit while others stretch bare limbs toward the sky. You can almost smell the crushed olives and sun-warmed earth. This amphora stands out among our 42 masterpieces because it dares to elevate the ordinary. In a culture that immortalized warriors and deities, the Antimenes painter turned his brush toward the unnamed men who fueled Athenian prosperity. The olive wasn't just a crop, it was the backbone of the economy, its oil lighting lamps, anointing athletes, and gracing every table. By capturing its harvest, the painter wove those invisible laborers into the tapestry of history. There's poetry in his composition too, the way the workers form a diagonal cascade from treetop to ground, mirroring the fall of the olives themselves, or how the amphora's own sturdy shape echoes the baskets brimming with fruit. Yet for all its realism, the scene isn't devoid of mythic resonance. Athena's sacred tree looms in the background, a subtle nod to the goddess who gifted Athens the first olive. The painter bridges the divine and the earthly, suggesting that heroism isn't just found in battle, but in the calloused hands that fed a civilization. Today, when we look at this vase, we're not just seeing ancient agriculture, we're seeing the birth of something radical. Art that insists the laborer's story is just as worthy of immortality as Achilles' rage. And in that insistence, the Antimenes painter harvests something far more enduring than olives. He gathers the quiet glory of work itself, pressing it into clay so it might never be forgotten. Imagine a lavish Etruscan banquet around 500 BC, where the clink of golden goblets mixes with the murmur of a language utterly foreign to Greek ears. At the center of the feast stands an Athenian crater, its surface alive with the exploits of Heracles, a hero these Italian elites have never met in their own myths, yet whose struggles captivate them as intensely as any local legend. This wasn't just trade, it was cultural alchemy. The Etruscans, a people whose own art favored swirling bronzes and haunting tomb frescoes, became voracious collectors of Greek pottery, importing thousands of vessels across the Mediterranean. Many of the most exquisitely preserved pieces in our 42 masterpieces, like the François vase or the Euphronios crater, weren't found in Athens or Corinth, but in the rich soil of Etruscan tombs where they'd been buried like treasure alongside their aristocratic owners. What's fascinating is how these vases transcended their original context. To the Greeks, they were functional objects, wine cups, oil jars, mixing bowls. But to the Etruscans, they became talismans of status and sophistication, their intricate scenes decoded through a distinctly non-Greek lens. Take the famous Theseus and the Minotaur Kylix now in the Louvre. In Athens, this might have been a straightforward allegory of civic pride. In Etruria, scholars suspect it resonated differently, perhaps echoing their own underworld myths, where labyrinthine journeys held spiritual weight. Some vases even bear Etruscan graffiti, like the poignant inscription on a 6th century BC amphora that reads, "My Aranthia," proclaiming ownership by a man named Aranth in bold, looping letters foreign to the Greek painter's hand. The trade routes tell their own story. Ships laden with pottery sailed from Athens to Etruscan ports like Volsae and Servitory, where local artisans sometimes added gilded accents or repurposed vessels for new rituals. A Greek hydria meant for carrying water might become an Etruscan funerary urn, its mythic scenes now speaking to the journey of the soul. The demand was so intense that some scholars believe certain Athenian workshops tailored their designs for Etruscan tastes, more Dionysian revelry, say, or added emphasis on underworld themes. Yet this cultural exchange wasn't one-sided. Etruscan artisans began imitating Greek styles, creating hybrid works that blended Athenian technique with local flair. Their versions often bolder, more exaggerated, like a Greek melody played on Etruscan instruments. And when you see an Etruscan tomb fresco depicting a symposium, the drinking vessels are unmistakably Greek in style, proving how deeply this pottery permeated their visual language. The real magic lies in the tombs themselves. While many Greek vases in their homeland were broken or worn from use, Etruscan nobles buried theirs pristine, sealing them in chambers where time barely touched them. That's why the colors on an Etruscan-found vase often blaze brighter, the details crisper. They weren't just imported artifacts, but cherished companions for the afterlife. When we unearth them today, we're not just finding Greek art. We're discovering how beauty crossed borders, how a hero's story painted in Athens could comfort an Etruscan noble in eternity, and how two cultures, separated by sea and language, found common ground in the curve of a vase and the tales it carried. The pioneer group didn't just adopt the red figure technique, they weaponized it, turning clay into a battlefield where anatomy, perspective, and sheer audacity collided. Picture Euphronios hunched over an unfired vase, his brush hovering as he debates whether to attempt something no artist had dared before, a three-quarter view of a face. Until this moment, Greek vase painting had been a world of profiles, noses like knife edges, eyes staring rigidly sideways. But here, on a humble calyx crater, his Heracles suddenly turns toward the viewer, his features rendered with a foreshortening so radical it must have stunned contemporaries. The hero's left eye dips slightly, his nose bridges the gap between profile and frontal view, and just like that, Greek art lurches toward dimensionality. This wasn't solitary genius at work. The pioneer group Euphronios, Euthamides, Finches, and a handful of others thrived on rivalry, their signatures often laced with playful smack talk. Euthamides' Amphora, showing drunken revelers, bears the cheeky inscription, "As never Euphronios could do," right beside a twisting back view of a dancer, his spine rendered with anatomical precision that still feels modern. These weren't just boasts, they were manifestos. Every exaggerated muscle on a wrestler's torso, every drape clinging to a thigh as if wet with sweat, became a gauntlet thrown down to peers. What set them apart was their obsession with the body in motion. Earlier red figure artists had focused on clean silhouettes, but the pioneers craved dynamism. Euphronios' crater depicting Sarpedon's death doesn't just show a corpse, it gives you the weight of his limp body, the strain in Thanatos' wings as he lifts him, even the drag of his spear trailing in the dirt. And then there's the Berlin Foundry Cup, where metalworkers hammer bronze into shape, their arms captured mid-swing with a kinetic energy that makes the scene pulse. These painters didn't just depict movement, they bottled its essence, using every trick diluted glaze for shadow, scratchy incision lines for texture to make clay breathe. Yet for all their innovation, the pioneers remained storytellers at heart. Take Finch's lyre playing satyr, whose fingers aren't just accurately placed on the strings, they're slightly curled as if caught between notes. Or Euthamides' revelers' Amphora, where the drunkest figures' crossed eyes and splayed toes tell a whole comic saga without a single word. Their genius lay in merging technical prowess with narrative wit, proving that realism didn't require solemnity. The legacy of these artists radiates far beyond their signatures. In their hands, pottery stopped being craft and became a laboratory, one where every vase asked, "What if? What if a foot could foreshorten as it steps toward us? What if cloth could ripple like real fabric, not just geometric folds?" Their experiments laid the groundwork for everything from Hellenistic sculpture to Renaissance frescoes. And in our 42 masterpieces, their works stand as seismic shifts, moments when art took a breath, leaned forward, and leapt into the unknown. The Cleophrades painter didn't just decorate vases, he staged epics in miniature, turning the curve of an amphora into a proscenium where every figure quivered with barely contained energy. Take his iconic depiction of the fall of Troy. Flames lick at the edges of the composition. Women clutch their children with hands that tremble in the glaze, and warriors lunge with spears angled so sharply you can almost hear them whistle through the air. This wasn't painting, it was choreography, each limb and weapon placed to pull your eye into the heart of the chaos. What sets him apart isn't just the dynamism, it's the emotional precision. A reveling satyr isn't merely drunk. His staggering posture and sloshing cup make you feel the weight of his intoxication. A grieving warrior over a fallen comrade doesn't just mourn. His hunched shoulders and splayed fingers telegraph despair so visceral it transcends the centuries. His technical prowess redefined what red figure could achieve. Where others used the brush for clean outlines, Cleophrades wielded it like a sculptor's tool, building depth with layered strokes. Notice how he shades a Maenad's flowing robe not with flat color, but with gradients that suggest fabric twisting in motion. Or the way he renders a dying Amazon's face, her eyelids half lowered not with a single line, but with a softening of the glaze that mimics the very flicker of life fading. This attention to nuance extended to his compositions, which often broke conventions. On a Hydria showing Heracles and the Nemean lion, he crammed the struggle into a tight, diagonal clash, the hero's muscles straining against the beast's bulk in a way that makes the vase itself feel unstable, as if it might topple from the violence of the scene. Yet for all his dramatic flair, the Cleophrades painter had a poet's eye for quiet moments. One of our 42 selections, a Sictor decorated with symposiasts, captures a reveler mid-laugh, his head thrown back so far his wreath slips askew. The painter immortalized not just the action, but the sound of his laughter, the warmth of the wine, the camaraderie thick in the air. Even his signatures carried panache. Some vases bear not just his name, but playful declarations like "Cleophrades painted me." As if the vase itself were boasting of its creator's skill. What's astonishing is how modern his work feels. The way he crops figures at the edges of scenes, suggesting a world beyond the vase's frame. His willingness to leave negative space, a rarity in Greek pottery, to heighten emotional impact. When you stand before one of his pieces, you're not just seeing ancient art, you're witnessing the birth of visual storytelling techniques that would echo through Renaissance frescoes and modern cinema alike. The Cleophrades painter didn't follow trends, he set them, proving that clay could hold as much passion, as much humanity, as any temple frieze or bronze statue. And in that, he gave us more than vases. He gave us windows to a world where every glance, every gesture, was charged with the electricity of life itself. The Dowerist cup doesn't just hold wine, it holds worlds. Each sip revealing another layer of storytelling so precise it feels like watching a master calligrapher at work. Picture a symposium guest tilting the kylix to their lips, only to discover a scene unfolding in the tondo, the circular center, where a young student hesitates before his seated teacher, a wax tablet balanced awkwardly in his hands. The boy's posture slumps with reluctant focus, his toes curled inward as if resisting the lesson, while the teacher leans forward, his stylus poised mid-correction. This isn't just a snapshot of ancient education. It's a moment of quiet humanity, captured with such observational wit that you can almost hear the sigh of a bored child 2,500 years ago. Dowerist genius lay in his ability to compress entire narratives into the kylix's confined space without sacrificing clarity or emotion. Where other painters might crowd the frame, he embraced negative space, letting the curve of the cup amplify the drama. Take his depiction of Eos, the dawn goddess, cradling her dead son Memnon. Her wings envelop him like a shroud, her face a study in maternal grief, yet the composition feels spacious, almost serene. The restraint is deceptive. With just a few diluted brushstrokes, he suggests the tear streaks on her cheeks, the limp weight of Memnon's arm dangling over her knee. But Dowris was no solemn chronicler. His cups brim with playful energy too. One tondo shows a satyr attempting to teach a flustered mien at the double flute, their faces inches apart as she fumbles the fingerings, a comic vignette that would have drawn laughter from symposium guests. Another captures Ajax and Achilles' mid-dice game, the heroes' competitive tension conveyed entirely through their locked eyes and the white-knuckled grip Ajax has on his throwing cup. Dowris didn't need elaborate backgrounds. His figures spoke through posture and glance, their interactions so nuanced they feel ripped from daily life. Technically, his work was revolutionary. He pushed red figures' potential further than anyone before him, using a brush so fine it could render individual eyelashes or the gossamer wrinkles of an old man's tunic. His drapery didn't just clothe bodies, it moved with them, clinging to a dancer's sweat-slicked skin or billowing behind a sprinting athlete like a living thing. And no one composed within a circle better. Every figure arched or curled to complement the tondo's shape, a reclining symposium guest's outstretched arm becoming a visual counterbalance, or a fleeing Trojan woman's swirling robes echoing the cup's rim. Among our 42 masterpieces, Dowris cups stand as testaments to the power of economy. He proved that greatness isn't measured by scale, but by the depth of feeling a single, perfectly placed line can evoke. To drink from one of his kylixes wasn't just to consume wine, it was to commune with an artist who saw the epic in the everyday, and who could make even a clay cup feel as boundless as the myths it carried. The Aeson Kylix doesn't just show Theseus defeating the Minotaur, it plunges you into the labyrinth itself, the curve of the cup becoming the very walls that once trapped the monstrous beast. As your fingers trace the vessel's rim, your eye follows the hero's sinewy arm mid-strike, his blade poised to pierce the Minotaur's throat, while the creature recoils with a roar frozen in black figure silhouette. Aeson, the painter behind this masterpiece, didn't merely illustrate the myth. He weaponized the kylix's shape to heighten the drama. The Minotaur's twisted horns nearly graze the cup's edge, as if the fight could spill beyond the clay at any moment, while Theseus' outstretched leg mirrors the handle's arc, binding the composition into a single, fluid motion. What sets this scene apart is its raw physicality. Earlier depictions of the myth often framed Theseus as a static hero, standing victorious over our already slain foe. Here, Aeson captures the struggle's climax, the instant where strength, strategy, and sheer survival collide. Every muscle in Theseus' back strains with effort, his torso twisted to maximize the thrust of his sword. The Minotaur, far from a generic monster, is rendered with startling individuality. One hoofed leg buckles under its own weight, its humanoid face contorted in a snarl that reveals uneven, jagged teeth. Even the discarded ball of thread in the corner, Ariadne's clever gift, is painted with such care that you can almost see the individual fibers loosening across the labyrinth floor. Aeson's genius lies in how he plays with perspective. The scene wraps around the cup like a frieze, but the figures aren't flat. Theseus' shield overlaps the Minotaur's arm, creating a sense of depth, while the hero's foreshortened left foot seems to push forward, as if he's stepping out of the vase toward the viewer. This wasn't just technical bravado, it was narrative cunning. As symposium guests rotated the kylix, the battle would unfold in stages, first the tension of the approach, then the clash, and finally, when the wine was drained, the aftermath hinted at by the bloodied axe at Theseus' feet. But look closer, and the kylix reveals quieter triumphs. The Minotaur's tail, often ignored in other renditions, curls inward like a wounded scorpion's, a subtle touch that makes the beast feel more alive in its final moments. Theseus' hair, usually neatly tied in heroic fashion, flies loose, a single damp lock clinging to his forehead. These aren't idealized symbols, they're humanizing details that ground the myth in visceral reality. Among our 42 masterpieces, the Aeson Kylix stands as a testament to how pottery could rival grand sculpture or fresco in emotional power. It's not just a depiction of victory, it's an invitation to witness the cost of it, to feel the heat of the fight and the weight of the hero's exhaustion. And when you hold it today, you're not just holding a cup, you're holding the moment Theseus became legend, frozen forever in the dance of brush and clay. The moment their eyes meet, the world shrinks to the space between Achilles' blade and Penthesilea's collapsing body, a single heartbeat where victor and victim transcend myth to become something painfully human. The Penthesilea painter doesn't just depict a death, he dissects a paradox. Achilles' face, usually a mask of battle fury, softens with something like recognition as the Amazon queen sinks toward the earth, her gaze locked onto his with neither fear nor hatred, but a quiet, almost tender resignation. Blood pools at her waist, her battle axe slipping from fingers that moments ago could have killed him, yet the painter strips away all triumphalism. This isn't a celebration of heroism, it's an elegy. What makes this amphora extraordinary is how it weaponizes subtlety. The composition avoids chaos. There are no sprawling limbs or gory wounds. Instead, the tragedy unfolds in the tilt of Penthesilea's head, the way her helmet has skewed to reveal a single loose curl clinging to her cheek. Achilles' supporting hand, the one not driving the spear, hovers near her shoulder, caught between pushing her away and catching her fall. Even their weapons tell a story. His spear pierces her diaphragm, a wound designed to steal breath rather than spill guts, while her discarded axe lies at an angle that mirrors the slant of her weakening knees. Every detail conspires to elongate the moment, stretching the split second of death into an eternal confrontation. The painter's genius lies in his restraint. Where other artists might drown the scene in decorative flourishes fallen comrades, watching gods, he isolates the pair against a vast black glaze, the negative space amplifying their intimacy. Penthesilea's patterned tunic, painted with meticulous cross-hatching, seems to dissolve at the edges, as if the world is already forgetting her. Achilles' armor, usually gleaming in victory scenes, here appears almost dull, the incised lines of his cuirass mimicking the tension in his own furrowed brow. This isn't the Achilles of epic poetry. It's a boy who's just realized the cost of his legend. Psychological depth this nuanced is vanishingly rare in ancient art. Most battle scenes prioritize action over emotion, their figures frozen in generic combat stances. But the Penthesilea painter dares to ask, what happens after the spear strikes? What flickers in the space between life and legend? His answer resonates across millennia because it's not about Amazons or Greeks, it's about the universal shock of recognizing humanity in someone you've been taught to call enemy. Found in Volsae and now housed in Munich, this amphora's survival feels like a miracle. The fragile emotions it carries should have faded with the pigments, yet they blaze brighter than any gilded shield. When you stand before it, you're not just seeing a scene from myth. You're witnessing the birth of empathy in art, a moment when clay and glaze transcended storytelling to become a mirror, reflecting the terrible, beautiful truth that even heroes bleed. The Pronomos vase doesn't just sit on a pedestal, it hums with backstage chatter, the air thick with the scent of grease paint and anticipation. Imagine the scene, actors frozen mid-gesture, their padded satyr costumes straining at the seams, grotesque masks tilted as they adjust straps or share last-minute cues. Dionysus lounges at the center, his relaxed posture a stark contrast to the flurry around him, a silent reminder that this chaos is all in his honor. This volute crater isn't merely a painting, it's a portal to the 4th century B.C., when theater wasn't just entertainment but a sacred dialogue between mortals and gods. What makes this vase extraordinary is its documentary precision. The painter, likely an eyewitness to these rituals, captured details most would overlook. The stitching on an actor's leggings, the way a mask's exaggerated frown cast shadows under stage lights, even the calloused hands of the flute player tuning his instrument in the corner. These aren't generic figures, they're individuals, each absorbed in their own moment of preparation. One satyr actor tests his exaggerated phallus strap, while another secures his horsetail buttocks with a grin visible beneath his mask's snarl. The realism is so vivid you can almost hear the rustle of linen and the director's barked orders. The vase's shape elevates the drama. The volute handles frame the scene like theater wings, their spiral curves echoing the whirl of activity below. Dionysus and Ariadne occupy the prime viewing spot on the belly, their divine presence legitimizing the human spectacle. Around them, the actors don't just wear costumes, they inhabit them, their bodies twisted in poses that preview the play's physical comedy. A satyr leans drunkenly against a staff, his mask's tongue lolling, while another mimes shock with hands flung skyward, a parody of tragic convention. But the true stroke of genius is the inclusion of the playwright himself. Pronomos, the vase's namesake, stands proudly with his cast, a scroll in hand, a rare acknowledgement of the creative mind behind the magic. His poised demeanor contrasts with the actor's antics, a subtle nod to the tension between art and execution. Nearby, the chorus members adjust their identical masks, their uniformity a visual rhythm amidst the chaos, while the musician's fingers hover over his aulos, ready to plunge the audience into rhythm. This crater bridges two worlds, the ephemeral thrill of live performance and the permanence of ceramic art. Satyr plays, with their raunchy humor and mythic satire, were the after-parties of Greek theater, rowdy, irreverent, and deeply human. By freezing this backstage moment, the painter gave immortality to what was meant to vanish with the curtain's fall. Today, when we study the Pronomos vase, we're not just analyzing ancient art. We're crashing the green room of history, eavesdropping on whispers between actors who have been dead for millennia, yet feel alive enough to nudge us with a padded elbow and wink through their masks. The Persephone painter's Lakithos holds its breath. Hermes' hand barely grazes Persephone's wrist as he guides her toward the underworld's shadows, their movement so tender you'd mistake it for a lover's farewell rather than a divine abduction. Unlike the violent clashes or ecstatic revelry of other vases, this scene pulses with quiet resignation. The painter strips away everything extraneous. No wailing furies, no gaping chasm of Hades, just the slender figures of god and goddess suspended in a moment of unbearable intimacy. Persephone's drapery falls in soft, weightless folds, its pale ochre hue barely tinting the white ground surface, as if even the pigment hesitates to intrude on her grief. Her face, rendered with the faintest strokes of diluted glaze, tilts downward, not in defeat but in solemn acknowledgement of the cycle she embodies. What makes this Lakithos extraordinary isn't just its subject, it's the restraint. The Persephone painter wields absence like a brushstroke, Hermes' winged sandals, typically a flurry of motion in other depictions, here barely lift from the ground, their feathers sketched with whispers of gray. The underworld looms only as a faint, undulating line beneath their feet, more suggestion than abyss. Even the pomegranate, that fateful fruit Persephone tasted to bind herself to Hades, hangs half-hidden in the background, its seeds reduced to a smudge of crimson no larger than a teardrop. This isn't mythology spelled out in bold strokes. It's poetry written in the spaces between lines. Technically, the vase is a marvel of economy. The painter used the white ground surface like parchment, layering translucent washes to create depth where others would rely on heavy outlines. Persephone's hair isn't a solid mass but individual strands lifted by an unseen breeze, each one incised with a needle so fine it could have been a spider's thread. Hermes' caduceus, usually a rigid staff, here curves gently, echoing the slump of Persephone's shoulders, a visual rhyme that ties their fates together. And then there's the negative space, vast and luminous, pressing in on the figures until their isolation becomes the story itself. Among our 42 masterpieces, this Lekythos stands apart because it doesn't shout its sorrow. It lets silence speak, where other funerary vases scream with mourners or blaze with underworld torches. The Persephone painter trusts the viewer to lean closer, to fill the gaps with their own breath. Found in a tomb, it would have shimmered with oil in the lamplight, the scene flickering as if alive, a reminder that grief, like the seasons, is both endless and fleeting. To hold it today is to cradle a paradox, a vessel meant for the dead that pulses with more quiet vitality than 100 battle scenes. In its hush, we hear the true power of Greek art, not to overwhelm but to haunt. The foundry painter's cup plunges us into the soot-streaked heart of divine industry. No lofty Olympus here, just the clang of hammers and the hiss of hot metal as Hephaestus, sweat gleaming on his muscled arms, shapes Achilles' fateful armor. The god of the forge isn't seated in majesty but crouched over an anvil, his lame foot tucked awkwardly beneath him, his expression locked in the same focused scowl as any mortal blacksmith. Around him, assistants dart like sparks from a furnace. One pumps the bellows with straining arms, another grips tongs to hold red-hot greaves, while a third, perhaps a young cyclops, hefts a massive hammer, its weight bending his knees. This isn't a sanitized myth. It's a workshop alive with the rhythm of labor where gods and monsters roll up their sleeves. What's revolutionary is the painter's obsession with process. Every tool is rendered with archaeological precision, the anvil's chipped edge, the bellow's leather seams, even the charcoal glowing in the furnace, its heat suggested by delicate strokes of orange-red slip. The armor itself emerges half-formed under Hephaestus' blows, one greave already polished to a mirror shine while the cuirass lies crumpled like parchment, awaiting its final strike. This attention to craft mirrors the painter's own meticulous technique, each incision in the black figure glaze echoing the god's chisel marks on bronze. But the true genius lies in the humanization of the divine. Hephaestus' brow furrows not with godly wrath but the familiar frustration of a craftsman troubleshooting his work. His assistants aren't idealized nymphs but individuals. One helper's balding scalp shines under the forge light, another's bent spine hints at years of stooped labor. Even the god's lameness, often downplayed in other depictions, is evident in how he braces his weight, turning a divine trait into a relatable physicality. The scene pulses with layers of meaning. To Athenian viewers, it celebrated their city's industrial prowess, the forges of the Acropolis mirrored in Hephaestus' workshop. For soldiers, it sanctified their armor as literal godwork, each breastplate imbued with celestial skill. And for artisans, it was a sly nod to their own undervalued genius, elevating their labor to the realm of myth. Among our 42 masterpieces, this cup stands as a testament to the poetry of the everyday. It asks us to see divinity not in lightning bolts or tempests, but in the perfect curve of a helmet's rim, in the calloused hands that shape destiny one hammer stroke at a time. The foundry painter didn't just depict a myth, he forged a bridge between Olympus and the workshop, reminding us that even gods know the weight of a good day's work. The Achilles painter's Lakithos cradles grief like a whispered lullaby, no wailing mourners or rending of garments here, just a warrior standing motionless as a woman presses her forehead to his shoulder, her fingers curling into the fabric of his cloak with quiet desperation. What's astonishing isn't the absence of emotion, but its distillation into something purer, a single, suspended moment where sorrow and serenity coexist. This artist, known only by the name we've given him after his iconic depiction of Achilles, didn't dramatize farewells. He sanctified them. His white-ground vessels, bathed in that pale, almost ethereal slip, feel like fragments of a dream, where every figure moves with a grace that transcends the clay beneath them. Take his depiction of a young athlete preparing for competition. Unlike the taut, straining bodies favored by other painters, this youth adjusts his sandal with effortless poise, his muscles relaxed but alert, as if the act itself were a meditation. The painter captures the curve of his spine, the slight tilt of his head, with lines so fluid they seem to breathe. Even the empty space around him isn't vacant, it hums with anticipation, the white ground becoming sunlight, air, the very essence of the gymnasium. But it's in his funerary scenes that the Achilles painter's genius shines brightest. A mother bends over a grave stele, her chiton falling in soft folds that mirror the drape of the offerings she's laid. There's no theatrical anguish, only a quietude so profound it aches. The painter achieves this not through omission, but through precision. The way her fingertips brush the marble just enough to suggest lingering warmth, or how the mourner beside her holds a wreath not as an ornament, but as a weight. These aren't generic mourners, they're individuals, their grief as distinct as their profiles. Technically, his work is a marvel of restraint. Where others might drown white ground surfaces in polychrome, he lets the pale clay speak, using diluted glaze to suggest the flush of a cheek or the translucence of a veil. His incised lines are so fine they seem to hover above the surface, as if drawn with a feather, and his compositions, always balanced, never static, guide the eye in gentle arcs like the slow unfurling of a scroll. Among our 42 masterpieces, his Lekithoi stand as quiet rebels. In a world that celebrated the clamor of battle and the frenzy of myths, the Achilles painter dared to honor the pauses, the deep breath before the plunge, the hush between heartbeats. To hold one is to understand that true artistry doesn't shout. It lingers like the last note of a hymn, long after the singing has stopped. Amidst the roaring battles and divine dramas that dominate Greek pottery, the reed painter's work feels like stepping into a sun-dappled grove, where the heroes are hummingbirds and the epics unfold in the unfurling of a single vine. While his contemporaries filled their vases with clashing titans and thunder-wielding gods, this artist turned his brush toward the whispering reeds along riverbanks, the delicate flutter of a sparrow's wing, the way morning glories spiral around olive branches as if in a slow, silent dance. His hydria might show a heron poised mid-step in a marsh, its reflection barely rippling in the water below, while his kylixes bloom with anemones so lifelike you'd swear their petals would tremble if touched. This wasn't mere decoration, it was an ode to the untamed world just beyond Athens' bustling streets, a reminder that beauty thrived in the unseen corners. What's striking is how his naturalism dances between observation and symbolism. Every leaf and tendril is rendered with botanical precision, likely studied from the hillsides of Attica, yet they're never just plants. A twisting grapevine might echo Dionysian revelry without a single figure present. A swooping swallow could carry the hope of spring's return. Even his reeds, the motif that earned him his modern name, are never static. They bend as if brushed by a breeze only the painter could feel, their rhythmic patterns guiding the eye like a melody. Unlike the rigid symmetry of earlier geometric art, his compositions feel organic, as if the designs grew naturally from the clay itself. The reed painter's palette whispers where others shouted. Instead of the bold blacks and fiery reds of mythological scenes, he often worked in softer tones, ochre for sunlight filtering through leaves, diluted glaze for the translucent wings of damselflies. On a lakythos now in the Metropolitan Museum, he painted a moment so quiet it's almost sacred. A bee, its legs dusted with pollen, hovering near a spray of wild roses. The scene occupies just a fraction of the vase's surface, yet it commands attention through its tenderness, a testament to the artist's belief that smallness could be monumental. In the grand narrative of Greek pottery, where valor and tragedy take center stage, the reed painter's work is a lyrical interlude. His vases didn't glorify cities or gods, but the earth that sustained them, the same earth that yielded the clay he shaped. When you trace the curve of a stamnos adorned with flowering ivy, you're not just seeing art, you're touching the quiet heartbeat of a culture that knew how to worship with equal reverence at the altar of wild things. Among our 42 masterpieces, his vessels are the ones that ask you to kneel, to look closer, to remember that myth isn't always written in lightning, sometimes it's woven into the roots. The astonishing legacy of these 42 vases isn't just in their beauty or craftsmanship, it's in their ability to collapse time, bridging 25 centuries with a single brushstroke. When you stand before a Greek vase in a museum, you're not just observing an artifact, you're locking eyes with an artist who laughed at the same human follies, mourned the same losses, and marveled at the same myths that still resonate today. These pieces defy their humble material-fired earth, mineral pigments, and glaze to become something immortal. They've survived shipwrecks, tomb robbers, and the shifting tastes of history because they speak a universal language, the joy of a symposium's clinking cups, the ache of a soldier's farewell, the divine mischief of gods who still feel startlingly human. What's remarkable is how these vases refuse to be passive relics. A geometric amphora from the 8th century B.C. whispers about the birth of storytelling through art, while a red figure kylix by Dowris captures the playful wink of a satyr mid-prank, proving that humor hasn't aged a day. The Panathenaic prize vessels remind us that ambition and competition fueled the ancient world just as they do our modern stadiums, and the white-ground lekythoi with their ghostly mourners offer solace that grief, too, is a thread connecting us across millennia. Every scratch in the glaze, every fingerprint baked into the clay, is a signature of humanity itself, but the true magic lies in their accessibility. Unlike towering statues or crumbling temples, these vases fit in the crook of an arm, their intimacy pulling you into their world. You don't need a degree in archaeology to feel the tension in Achilles' shoulders as he bends over that dice game, or to catch the quiet pride in Exekias' signature. That's why we encourage you to seek them out, whether in the hushed halls of the Metropolitan Museum, the sunlit galleries of Athens, or even through the pages of a book. Hold a replica if you can, trace the curves meant for ancient hands, and let your imagination fill in the voices, the scents of olive oil and wine, the warmth of a kiln firing dreams into permanence. As this journey through clay and color comes to a close, remember that these masterpieces aren't behind glass because they're fragile. They're there because they're powerful. They've outlasted empires not by being untouchable, but by being irresistibly alive. So tell us, which vase spoke to you? Was it the tragedy of Penthesilea's dying gaze, the whimsy of the heron cup, or perhaps the quiet dignity of a mother at a grave? Drop your favorite in the comments, share this video with fellow history lovers, and keep the conversation going. And if you've enjoyed this deep dive into ancient stories told through clay, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because the past has plenty more secrets to spill, and we can't wait to explore them with you. Until next time, keep looking closely, The smallest details often hold the